Behind its attractive travel commercials, China is sitting on the edge of the biggest economic collapse.
Youth unemployment has hit a record high.
Youth unemployment was almost 21%. That's a record high.
From citizens swearing to jump off the building to youth being beaten for breaking the zero-COVID policy to frustrated citizens protesting against the real estate market crash. The current situation in China is more devastating than you can imagine. And as we discuss this issue, giant companies are already losing billions of dollars in the background. Recently, China's biggest real estate developer, Evergrande, revealed that they have incurred $81 billion loss in the last 2 years. On the other hand, in the last 3 years, China's exports have recorded the biggest decline, and its currency against the US dollar has fell to the lowest since 2008. Not to forget, the effects of its zero-COVID policy have forced Apple, TSMC, and other big giants to shift their supply chain out of China. This, in return, could remove the World Factory tag from China, which has been maintained for more than 4 decades. Surprisingly, all of this is happening in the second-largest economy in the world, a country whose GDP in 2021 was equal to Japan, Germany, India, the United Kingdom, and Canada combined. The situation became worse when rural banks in China froze the savings accounts of more than 400,000 customers. And when they protested to get back their money, they were openly beaten by hundreds of unknown men. So what is happening in the world's factory? And is China heading towards a bigger crash than we thought? To understand the beginning of its crisis, let's rewind back to the year 2012, when Andrew Left, a short seller and activist, was looking at the balance sheet of China's second-largest property developer, Evergrande. Within a few minutes of his analysis, he was astonished to discover a warning sign that could soon engulf the majority of China's population. The company had $12 billion in liabilities, and his intuition believed that in the coming years, this company would have no other option than to file for bankruptcy. Now, the reason why this company matters to China is that instead of investing in the stock market, more than 70% of China's population pool their savings on real estate. And Evergrande has developed projects in more than 170 cities in mainland China. Moreover, the majority of Evergrande customers are middle-class individuals, which means any form of mismanagement in this company would directly affect the population. So to warning investors, Andrew published a critical report about Evergrande in 2016. His report described how its leaders are diverting investors' money in areas without experience. For example, acquiring this football club and spending enormously to hire top players, then creating Hangtan Film Production Company and its own mineral water brand for 5.5 billion yuan. They even hired Jackie Chan to promote it. However, instead of investigating the business activities of Evergrande, the Hong Kong Market Misconduct Tribunal suspended Andrew from publishing this report. They blamed him for releasing false and misleading information with the objective of influencing transactions in his favor. But just like the 2008 moment, Andrew's predictions were right on its target. Because in the summer of 2021, Evergrande officially reported it has hundreds of billions of dollars in debt and is unable to make the payment. Soon, the share price sank from 31 Hong Kong dollars to just $1.16. Evergrande had $1 trillion worth of unfinished projects, which left more than 1.5 million people without their homes. The fall of Evergrande also dragged China's economy to the ground because around 29% of China's GDP is dependent on real estate. Now the citizens still looked for ways to recover from this crisis. They began by refusing to make payments to Evergrande, so that more pressure could be imposed on the company and the government to complete their projects. But before they could get over this issue, another massive hurdle was waiting in front of them. On 20th July 2021, a passenger from Moscow landed in Nanjing province of China, and he was infected with the Delta variant of COVID-19. At first, no one was able to detect this infection, but by the time they caught the same passenger, it was too late. The virus spread like fire in multiple provinces. This forced China's President Xi Jinping to apply the zero-COVID policy in the country, a policy that involves maximum control and suppression. In other words, stricter lockdowns, contact tracing, border quarantine, and any other action that could be used to control the infection. Although this was done for the protection of the citizens, the zero-COVID policy backfired in a way that Xi Jinping never imagined. The rising anger of the citizens from Evergrande, the shutdown of the area near the Apple factory, multiple COVID checkpoints in the logistics, supply chain issues, and lack of labor due to rising infections. All of them combined to have a negative impact on its economy. The situation became worse when China became the only country to extend its zero-COVID policy till December 2022. At the same time, the majority of the countries were already on their way to economic recovery. From 2020 to 2022, Beijing logistics sector worked below capacity, and Apple's favorite supplier, Foxconn, was punched in the face during lockdown. The Taiwan-based company employs more than 200,000 people, but during the lockdown, migrant workers were witnessed jumping out of the factory to save their lives. As workers agreed to stay inside the factory, the company responded with strict COVID rules like forcing the workers to eat alone in their rooms and not paying the workers who were infected or isolated. As the number of infected workers increased, they immediately feared that the government would lock them in the factory for months, so they began jumping out of the factory to get back to their city. One of the workers named Liu said, "I won't return to Foxconn even after the outbreak is contained. The thought of being trapped in a factory for an uncertain period of time freaks me out." Nevertheless, the majority of the migrant workers, which is more than 103 million people, live in the Henan province of China. And when they reached their home, something bigger than Foxconn was waiting for them. On April 2022, a person named Du went to his bank in Henan to withdraw some cash. However, instead of giving back his money, the bank refused this transaction without giving any reason. Surprisingly, Du was not the one. More than 400,000 customers in Henan started complaining about 5 banks refusing to give their money. And soon they realized they had become victims of a banking scandal not by a private bank, but by branches of China's central bank. Now the reason behind this scandal falls under 2 big reasons. One, many of these rural banks depend on the real estate market for higher returns. But after the real estate bubble hit by Evergrande, these rural banks have lost the majority of their money. And reason number 2 is President Xi Jinping's infamous strategy of giving giant loans to countries and making them dependent on China for not paying back. For example, Chinese banks gave $7 billion in loans to Sri Lanka for their infrastructure development. But when debt-trapped Sri Lanka failed to pay back the money, they had no other option than to hand over Sri Lanka's second-largest port to China. It is called Hambantota Port, which has been given on lease to China for 99 years at $1.1 billion. In 2020, the port handled 1.8 million tons of cargo. Of course, this amount will be deducted from $7 billion it owes to China. But if you look at Jinping's strategy, he has found a new way to take over foreign lands they don't even own. And the residents in China are facing the consequences. Du said he has put entire savings of his family worth $726,000 on these banks. If the bank won't pay back their money, then he would have no other option than to live on the streets. Despite more than a year to this issue, the banking situation still remains the same. Moving towards the export sector, China's manufacturing hub Shanghai is responsible for 40% of its exports. But during the lockdown, 45% of trucking capacity was parked in the garage, which resulted in 80% of the ships being delayed and an increase in prices of products due to a shortage of supply. Today, Foxconn is planning to shift its base to countries like India, and foreign investors are losing their trust in China. In May this year, China is again bracing for a new COVID wave, and experts are claiming that they are going to witness this situation every 6 months. So what are your views about China's crumbling economy? Do you think they will recover from this crisis in 2024? Tell us in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and press the like button if you like this video. Thank you so much for watching.